The call came 3 days after they forced me to resign, and it wasn't from my boss. "Ms. Whitmore," the man said, voice tight, careful. "This is Daniel Price, corporate counsel for Hawthorne Systems. I need to ask you something about your resignation letter." I didn't answer right away. I had learned, over 23 years, that silence makes people reveal more than questions ever do. He cleared his throat. "Do you still have a copy of your original employment agreement, the one you signed when you first joined the company?" That was when I understood, not everything, but enough. "My name is Sarah Whitmore. I am 56 years old. And until 3 days ago, I had worked at Hawthorne Systems in Boston for most of my adult life. I had walked out quietly, exactly the way they wanted. No scene, no anger. Just a single page I wrote myself and handed in before security escorted me out like a formality. Now the company's lawyer was calling me before 9 in the morning, asking about a contract signed decades ago. "I believe I do," I said evenly. Another pause. I could hear paper shifting on his end. The faint sound of someone breathing too fast. "Just to clarify," he continued, "your letter states that your resignation is effective upon receipt of full settlement of all contractual obligations. Can you explain what you intended by that language?" I looked at my phone, then at the kitchen table where my copy of that contract sat inside a worn folder. I didn't touch it. "It means exactly what it says," I replied. Silence stretched between us. He did not rush to fill it this time. "I see," he said finally. "We may need to revisit the circumstances surrounding your departure." "I'm sure you will," I said. Then I ended the call. Afterward, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. That was new. The story you are about to hear is a fictional work created by the writing team at Revenge AITA. It is inspired by real workplace dynamics and power imbalances many professionals face, but all characters, companies, and events have been crafted for storytelling purposes. Each story carries its own message, shaped by different choices, consequences, and truths. This one is about what happens when loyalty is mistaken for weakness, and how preparation can quietly change the outcome. Later that morning, as the city outside went on with its routines, I sat down and opened the folder I hadn't looked at in years, if they were finally reading closely. Then it was time to remember how all of this had started. Loyalty, I learned early, is measured by how much people assume you will tolerate without complaint. "Sarah, can you stay a little late?" my manager asked during my first year, "just until the numbers reconcile." "I can," I said. I always said I could. That was how it started at Hawthorne Systems. I joined in my early 30s, newly married, eager to prove I belonged. My first title was Junior Operations Analyst. My starting pay was $46,000 a year. I didn't negotiate. I was grateful just to be there. "You're steady," my supervisor told me during my first review. Not flashy, but solid. Solid became dependable. Dependable became invisible. Over the years, the titles changed. Analyst, senior analyst, operations lead, director. Each promotion came with more responsibility and less recognition. When systems broke, they called me. When audits loomed, they asked me to sit in. When executives needed historical numbers from contracts signed before they arrived, someone would say, "Ask Sarah. She'll know." I knew because I stayed. "Can you take this on too?" a vice president asked once, sliding a project across the table that wasn't mine. "It's outside my scope," I said carefully. He smiled. "But you'll handle it better than anyone else." So I did. I missed anniversaries. I took calls during hospital waiting rooms. I once joined a conference call from my car outside my daughter's recital because the quarterly report had an error no one else could find. "Thank you for always being flexible," Human Resources told me. They never said thank you for staying. By the time I reached my 50s, I was managing teams who didn't know how half the systems worked without me. I trained people who would later be paid more. I fixed mistakes quietly so no one else would look bad. "You're the backbone of this place," a colleague whispered once after a long night. I smiled, but something tightened in my chest, because backbones are only noticed when they break. "Thank you for coming in, Sarah," the CEO said, folding his hands as if we were about to discuss next quarter's goals instead of my future. His name was Robert Hale. I had reported to 3 CEOs over the years. He had been there for 11 months. "We'll keep this brief," he continued. "I know you value professionalism." I nodded. I had learned that nodding cost less than speaking. "This company is evolving," Robert said. And with change comes difficult conversations. He paused, then looked directly at me. I think you should leave while your dignity is still intact. The words were smooth, practiced, delivered without heat. I'm not being terminated, I asked. No, he said quickly. Nothing like that. We simply believe this is the right moment for a graceful exit. Graceful exit. Karen Miller from Human Resources slid a folder across the table. She had joined Hawthorne Systems 6 years after I did. Survived every reorganization by mastering the language of concern. This is just a formality, she said. A standard resignation letter. It allows everyone to move forward positively. I opened the folder. 1 page, my name already typed. Effective immediately. Full release of claims. Non-disparagement. Final settlement. I didn't say I wanted to resign, I said quietly. Robert leaned back. We're trying to protect you. Sarah, a termination raises questions. A resignation preserves your reputation. And if I don't sign, I asked. Karen smiled. Thin and careful. Then we may need to reassess performance alignment. I had 17 years of written reviews that said I exceeded expectations. They knew that. I knew they knew. Robert glanced at his watch. Take a few minutes, he said. But we do need an answer today. I closed the folder and rested my hand on top of it. My pulse stayed steady. That surprised me. I understand, I said. I stood, nodded once, and walked out with the folder still unopened in my hands. They believed silence meant agreement. They were wrong. The letter looked harmless at first glance. 1 page, clean margins, polite language. Take your time, Karen had said. As if time were something I had been offered instead of rationed. I sat alone and read it slowly, the way I had learned to read contracts after years of cleaning up other people's mistakes. The first line declared my resignation effective immediately. The second thanked the company for opportunities. The third released Hawthorne Systems, its executives, its board, and its future owners from any and all claims. Known or unknown. Known or unknown. My hand tightened around the paper. The next paragraph barred me from speaking negatively about the company, its leadership, or its practices. Another confirmed that the severance 4 weeks of pay constituted full and final settlement of all obligations. 4 weeks, after 23 years. This is standard. Karen's voice echoed in my head. It protects everyone, it protected them. I picked up the pen they had left on the table. It was heavy, expensive, meant to feel official. My name was already typed at the bottom. All that was missing was my signature. For a moment, I felt the weight of it all at once. The exhaustion, the fear of being labeled difficult. The quiet panic that comes when stability disappears without warning. Just sign it, a small voice inside me whispered. Be done. I pressed the pen to the paper, then I stopped. The language was too final, too clean. It erased not just my job, but my history, my leverage, my right to respond. It assumed I would leave grateful and silent. I stood up and walked back to Karen's office. The unsigned letter folded once in my hand. I need time, I said. Her smile froze for half a second. We were hoping to close this today. I won't sign anything today, I replied. I need to review it properly. Robert's door was open down the hall. He looked up when he heard our voices. Is there a problem, he asked? No, I said calmly. I just don't make permanent decisions under pressure. I walked out before either of them could respond. That pause, small, quiet, deliberate, was the first decision I made entirely for myself. My lawyer's office was small and quiet, the kind of place where people came to say things they could not say anywhere else. Richard Bloom didn't interrupt as I spread everything across his desk. Performance reviews going back nearly 2 decades. Emails thanking me for fixing problems that were not mine. The resignation letter Hawthorne wanted me to sign, the one I hadn't. He read without comment, his finger tracing lines, his eyes slowing at certain phrases. They didn't fire you, he said finally. They pushed. That was the point, I replied. They wanted me to leave without making noise. He nodded. And they gave you a letter that would have made sure you never could. I exhaled, a tension I hadn't named loosening slightly. They offered 4 weeks of pay, said it was generous. It's tidy, Richard said, not generous. He reached the resignation letter and stopped. This waiver is broad, he said, very broad. I noticed. Good, he said. Then he leaned back in his chair and looked at me directly. Now I need to ask you something. I waited. Do you still have the original employment agreement you signed when you first joined the company? The question caught me off guard, the one from my first year. Yes, he said. Before the mergers, before the acquisitions, before the new leadership. I think so, I said slowly. It should be in a box at home. Richard's expression didn't change, but something sharpened in his voice. That contract matters more than anything they handed you last week. Why, I asked. Because long-term agreements often contain protections no one remembers until it's inconvenient, he said, especially when ownership changes. He slid the resignation letter back toward me. Do not sign this, not yet, and do not let them rush you again. I nodded. They won't. Richard stood and opened a file drawer. Find that contract, he said. When you do, call me. There are reasons companies prefer resignations to terminations. I gathered my papers, my hands steady now. On the way out, he added quietly, people assume old documents lose power with time. Sometimes they gain it. When I returned to Hawthorne Systems, Robert Hale was already seated at the conference table, his jacket draped over the chair like he planned to be done quickly. Karen Miller sat beside him, folders stacked neatly in front of her. Have you had time to think? Robert asked. I have, I said, taking the seat across from them. I'm prepared to resign. Karen's shoulders eased. That's a wise decision, Sarah, but I won't be signing your letter, I added. The relief on Robert's face stalled halfway into confusion. Excuse me, I'll write my own resignation, I said, in my own words. Karen glanced at Robert, then back at me. That's not necessary. The document we provided covers everything. I'm sure it does. I replied. For you. Robert leaned forward. Let's not complicate this. We're offering you a clean exit. I'm not complicating anything, I said evenly. I'm resigning. I just won't use language I didn't choose. There was a pause. I could see Robert calculating how much this mattered. He believed the outcome was already decided. Fine, he said at last. Write your letter. We'll need it today. You'll have it, I said. Back in my car, my phone buzzed. A message from Richard Bloom appeared on the screen. One sentence, 42 words, no explanations, no embellishments. I read it once, then again. My thumb hovered over the reply. Are you sure? I typed. Yes, came his response. Exactly as written. Do not add or remove anything. At home. I opened my laptop and stared at the blank page longer than I expected. The sentence looked ordinary, almost polite. It did not sound like revenge. It sounded like precision. I hesitated, thinking of how easily this could go wrong. Then I printed it on company letterhead, signed my name in blue ink, and folded the page once. When I walked back into the building, I was calm. That seemed to unsettle them more than anger ever could. Karen took the letter from my hand without looking up. Thank you, Sarah. We'll process this immediately. Robert glanced at the page for less than a second. This is fine, he said. We'll have your final paperwork ready by the end of the week. I watched his eyes move across the paper. He didn't slow down. He didn't pause at the middle. Where the language shifted, he assumed it said what all resignation letters say. I'll need confirmation in writing, I said. Karen nodded, already stacking the letter with other documents. You'll receive an email by close of business. That email arrived less than an hour later. We acknowledge receipt of your resignation. It read, your final day of employment is effective immediately. They had missed it. By the next morning, my access badge no longer opened the parking gate. My work email stopped syncing. A message from payroll followed shortly after, outlining my final paycheck, my accrued vacation payout, and instructions for returning equipment. No one called, no one asked a question. At lunch, a colleague texted me, heard you're gone. I'm so sorry. I'm not. I typed back. I didn't explain. 2 days passed like that, systems closing, accounts disabled, the company moving on with impressive efficiency. On the third day, I noticed something change. My email access returned without explanation. No message, no apology. Just a silent restoration, as if someone had tripped over a wire and tried to put it back before anyone noticed. An hour later, my phone rang. I didn't answer. A voicemail followed. It wasn't from Robert. It wasn't from Karen. Miss Whitmore, the voice said carefully. This is Daniel Price from Hawthorne Systems Legal Department. We need to discuss the language of your resignation letter. I deleted the voicemail and waited. If they were calling legal, it meant someone had finally read the sentence. The first day passed without a word. No email, no call, nothing from Robert or Karen. Just the quiet confirmation that my access had been removed, then restored, then removed again. Someone inside the company was pulling levers without knowing which ones mattered. On the second day, Richard Bloom called me. "They're reading?" he said, slowly. "Who?" I asked. "Legal." He replied. "Human resources already moved too fast. Payroll followed. Legal is the last stop. And they never like surprises." I didn't tell him about the voicemail. I didn't need to. That afternoon, I opened the box I'd brought home from the office. Old notebooks, project binders, a framed photo from a team dinner years ago. At the bottom was the folder Richard had asked about. Thick paper, yellowed edges. My name typed in a font no one used anymore. I didn't open it yet. By the third morning, doubt crept in. Not panic. Just the quiet kind that asks whether you misread the room, whether confidence had tipped into arrogance, whether one sentence really could hold up against an entire company. My phone buzzed. An internal calendar alert appeared on my screen. Restored without explanation. Status meeting finance leadership. I stared at it, then closed the notification. 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time I answered. "Ms. Whitmore," the voice said, measured but strained. "This is Daniel Price. We spoke earlier this week." "I remember," I said. "There are questions," he continued. "Regarding your employment status, I assumed there would be," I replied. He paused. "We'd like to clarify certain obligations before anyone proceeds further." In the background, I could hear another voice, low and urgent, cut off abruptly. Daniel lowered his tone. "Would you be available to discuss this today?" "Yes," I said. "When you're ready." I set the phone down and finally opened the folder. They hadn't misread the sentence. They had underestimated everything behind it. The call came just after lunch. "Miss Whitmore," Daniel Price said, his voice careful in a way it hadn't been before. "Thank you for making time to speak with us." "Of course," I replied. "I want to be very clear," he continued. "This conversation is exploratory. We're simply trying to ensure there's alignment on the circumstances of your departure." "Go on," I said. He paused, choosing words the way people do when they are afraid of choosing the wrong ones. "It's been brought to our attention that certain remarks made during your final meeting may have been misinterpreted." I waited. "The phrase regarding leaving with your dignity intact," he said, "was not intended as an ultimatum." "Then what was it intended to be?" I asked. Another pause. Papers shifted. Someone whispered on his end, too close to the receiver. "Our position," Daniel said, "is that the company values your contributions and regrets any discomfort caused by that discussion." "I see," I said. "We're also reviewing the language of your resignation," he added, "specifically the conditions you referenced." I was very deliberate. I said, "So was my lawyer." "Yes," he said quietly. "We've gathered that." A new voice joined the call. Robert Hale. He sounded different without an audience. "Sarah," he said, forcing warmth into his tone, "I want you to know this was never meant to escalate. We'd like to discuss the possibility of you returning, even temporarily, to do what I asked, to help with the transition," he said. "There's been some disruption. I imagine there has," I said. "We can revisit terms," Daniel added quickly. "Compensation, title, flexibility." I didn't respond. Robert cleared his throat. "You've always been reasonable." I stayed silent. The quiet stretched, not awkward, instructive. Finally, Daniel spoke again. "Please understand. We're trying to avoid unnecessary complications." "I understand perfectly," I said. I ended the call without another word. Afterward, I opened my email and found a draft agreement waiting for my review. It was longer than the resignation letter. Much longer. I forwarded it to Richard Bloom and closed my laptop. They weren't afraid of losing me. They were afraid of what my silence allowed next. Walking away, I learned, is not the same as giving up. Richard Bloom called me 2 days after the draft agreement arrived. "They're ready to settle everything properly," he said. "All contractual obligations. Clean terms. No games." "Are they asking me to come back?" I asked. "They are," he replied. "But they're not insisting anymore." That told me everything I needed to know. When the final call came, Daniel Price sounded composed again, the way people do once the panic has passed. "Ms. Whitmore, we've reviewed the documentation. The company will honor the terms outlined in your original agreement. Compensation, benefits, and severance will be handled accordingly. I appreciate the confirmation, I said. There is, of course, the option to discuss a return, he added carefully. I won't be returning, I said, not sharply, not emotionally, just clearly. There was a brief silence. Then, understood, he said. Robert Hale did not join that call. He did not need to. The decision was no longer his to manage. The paperwork arrived later that week. It was thorough, respectful, precise. I read every page, signed where appropriate, and returned it without comment. When it was done, my resignation became final, not because I was pushed out, but because I chose the terms of my exit. On my last official day, no one asked me to clear my desk. No one escorted me out. My access ended quietly, the way it should have from the beginning. I closed my laptop and sat for a moment, not celebrating, not grieving, just steady. The life lesson I carry forward is simple, and hard-earned loyalty should never require silence. And dignity is not something a company grants you. It is something you protect by knowing your value, reading what you sign, and refusing to rush decisions that define your future. When you leave the right way, you take yourself with you intact, unafraid, and clear about what you deserve. I found out I was fired before I even reached the baggage claim. My phone vibrated while I was still standing near the gate, suitcase handle in my hand, wedding checklist open in my notes. The sender was my boss, Martin Hale, not human resources, not a meeting invite, just an email. I opened it without thinking, already planning to text my fiancé about the cake tasting later that afternoon. The subject line read, "You're fired, congrats." That was it. No greeting, no explanation. Inside the email was a single sentence confirming my termination, effective immediately, followed by a smiling emoji spelled out in words, like a joke someone expected me to laugh at. I stared at the screen until the letters stopped making sense. A woman beside me said, "Excuse me." Nudging past with her carry-on, I stepped aside automatically. My hands were steady. That part scared me more than the email. I called Martin, straight to voicemail. I called Human Resources. A recorded message told me their office hours. I hung up before it finished. "I'm Sierra. I was 32 years old, getting married in 3 days. And until 5 minutes ago, I was the senior systems licensing lead at a mid-sized tech firm in downtown Seattle. I had worked there for 6 years. I had trained half the department. I had built the licensing framework their entire operation depended on. I should have cried. I should have called my fiancé. I should have sat down. Instead, I opened my laptop. "Are you okay?" a man asked as he passed. Noticing my face, "I'm fine," I said. And surprised myself by meaning it. My inbox started updating. Internal alerts, automated system notifications. Everything still recognized me. They had fired me, but they had forgotten something important. I logged in. That was the moment I stopped being surprised and started being careful. The story you are about to hear is a fictional work created by the writing team at Revenge AITA. Names, companies, events, and outcomes are crafted for dramatic storytelling purposes, while inspired by real workplace dynamics. This narrative is not intended to represent any actual person or organization. Each story carries its own message and stands on its own. By the time I closed my laptop, my phone began buzzing again. This time, it was not silence on the other end. Chapter 2 began before I even left the airport. By the time I reached the rideshare pickup area, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text. "Lena, did you see the email?" Lena worked 2 desks down from me. We'd survived late nights together, coffee runs, deadlines that kept sliding closer without warning. I typed back, "Me, yes." 3 dots appeared, disappeared. Then came another message. "Lena, I think this was planned." I stopped walking. I called her instead. She answered immediately, her voice low and tight. "They knew you were landing this morning." I leaned against a column, laptop bag heavy on my shoulder. "What do you mean? Knew they were talking about it yesterday. Martin asked Eat to confirm your flight time." "That doesn't make sense," I said. "I was on approved leave." "I know," she said quickly. "That's why it felt wrong," he said. "Once she's back in Seattle, we move." Those were his words. I closed my eyes for a second, then opened them. "Move how?" "She didn't say it out loud," Lena said. "But they cleared your calendar, reassigned your onboarding session, And they had Evan sitting in your chair this morning. Evan, fresh hire, nice enough. No experience with enterprise licensing frameworks. I had trained him for 2 weeks. They told him I resigned, Lena added. I let out a short laugh that didn't sound like humor. Of course they did. Sierra, she said, hesitating, you know the system better than anyone. They think once you're gone, it's theirs. They fired me before my wedding, I said quietly. On purpose. Yes, she said. I'm sorry, I ended the call and stared at my phone. Senior Systems Specialist wasn't a title they gave lightly. I had designed the licensing structure that kept every department running, from sales validation to internal access control. Nothing major moved without touching my work. They didn't fire me because I was replaceable. They fired me because they thought I was done. My phone rang again. This time it was Martin. I watched it ring until it stopped. Then I opened my laptop and checked the internal dashboard. Everything was still live, every permission intact, every system responding to my credentials. They hadn't rushed, they had assumed. And that told me exactly how this was going to unfold. I pulled up my original employment contract while the ride crawled through traffic. The document was dated 6 years earlier, back when I had been grateful just to be offered a seat in the building. I remembered Martin sliding the folder across the table and saying, "It's standard, you can skim it later." I hadn't skimmed. I had read every line that night, sitting on my couch with a legal pad and a highlighter. Back then, I had asked one question. So who owns what I build, I'd said. Martin had looked annoyed. Anything you make here belongs to the company. That's not what this says, I replied. Tapping the page. This clause separates assigned work from independent architecture. He waved it off. It's boilerplate. No one enforces that. I do, I said, and I didn't smile. That clause was still there. Same language, same protection. It stated clearly that any licensing frameworks, authorization systems, or modular infrastructure developed outside direct written assignment remained my intellectual property unless transferred by separate agreement. There was no separate agreement. I scrolled further, opening my internal documentation. Sales verification ran through my licensing server. Logistics automation checked permissions against my code. Even internal employee tools depended on keys I had designed and maintained. A message popped up on my screen. "Martin, we need to talk." I ignored it. Another followed. "Martin, this is getting complicated." I laughed softly. Complicated was what he called things, once they were no longer simple for him. I remembered my first year there, how a senior engineer had said, "You're thorough, almost too thorough." I remembered being told I worried too much about ownership, about boundaries, about worst-case scenarios. "You think like someone who doesn't trust us," he'd said. "I think like someone who plans to still be standing," I answered. I closed the contract and leaned back. The company had built their growth on systems they never fully understood, created by someone they never thought would push back. They hadn't fired an employee. They had cut access to the one person who knew exactly where every lever was, and exactly which ones still belonged to her. I opened the licensing console and hovered my cursor over the permissions tab. I didn't rush. I read each permission line the same way I always had, carefully, deliberately, sales validation, order routing, internal access authentication. Each module tied back to the same licensing authority, mine. My phone lit up again. "Martin, Sierra, answer me." I muted it. Another message appeared, this one from Human Resources. "HR, there seems to be a misunderstanding. Please contact us immediately." A misunderstanding would have been an apology. This was panic wearing polite language. I clicked into the licensing console and selected the primary authorization group. A warning banner appeared on the screen, clear and precise, outlining exactly what would happen if access was revoked. It listed departments, dependencies, consequences. I didn't hesitate. I revoked the licenses. No data was erased. No files were corrupted. I didn't touch a single line of company-owned code. I simply withdrew permission for systems to authenticate against my framework. The dashboard refreshed. Within seconds, error notifications began stacking in the activity log. Sales authorization failed. Internal tools timed out. Automated workflows paused mid-process, waiting for credentials that no longer resolved. My phone rang. I watched the name flash on the screen and let it go dark. Another call followed, then another. The silence between them shrank fast. A new message came in from Lena. "Lena, What did you do? I typed back slowly. Me, I took back what was mine. There was a long pause before her reply. Lena. Everything just froze. I know, I said out loud, though she couldn't hear me. A voicemail notification appeared from Martin. Then another. The tone shifted even through text. Martin, this isn't funny. I closed the console and logged out completely. My credentials disconnected cleanly, like a door shutting without a slam. The calls kept coming, not just from Martin now, numbers I didn't recognize. Extensions from inside the building. I set my phone face down on the seat beside me and exhaled for the first time since the gate. This wasn't revenge. Revenge was emotional. This was structural. It was the consequence of treating access like ownership and people like placeholders. Somewhere downtown, screens were filling with error messages. Meetings were stopping mid-sentence. Someone was saying my name out loud for the first time that day with something close to fear, and they still didn't know how deep it went. The first voicemail came from Martin. His voice was tight, clipped, still trying to sound in control. Sierra, whatever this is, you need to reverse it immediately. You don't have the authority to the message cut off when he ran out of time. The second voicemail was longer. This is affecting sales. We have teams locked out. Call me now. Then the emails started stacking up faster than I could read the subject lines. Operations order processing has stopped across 3 regions. Sales director. Our accounts cannot verify licenses. Clients are calling. Finance revenue recognition is frozen. I didn't reply to any of them. My phone rang again. This time it wasn't Martin. It was a number I recognized from the executive floor. I let it ring until it stopped. A message appeared from Lena. Lena. They just pulled everyone into the main conference room, I typed back. Me. What are they saying? Her response came seconds later. Lena. At first they said it was a glitch. Then they said it was a security incident. Now they're asking who still has your contact information. Another call came through. I answered this one. Sierra, said a man I barely knew. Daniel from sales leadership. His voice shook. Our biggest retail client can't place their weekly order. They're threatening to cancel if this isn't fixed today. I'm not available, I said evenly. You can't just walk away, he snapped, then softened immediately. We need your help. You fired me, I replied, effective immediately. There was silence on the line. Then, we didn't think I know, I said, and ended the call. I opened the system logs again. Authorization requests were failing in waves, automated retries, escalations, alerts triggering other alerts. The infrastructure was doing exactly what it was designed to do when access was revoked. My phone buzzed again, a text from Martin this time. No title, no pretense. Martin, please, we can talk terms. The word please looked wrong coming from him. I set the phone down and watched the timestamps roll forward. Every minute of silence stretched tighter than the last. Somewhere in that building, authority was cracking, and panic was taking its place. The first legal email arrived just after noon. It wasn't subtle. Legal department, your actions constitute unauthorized interference with company operations. Restore access immediately to avoid further consequences. I read it once and set it aside. 10 minutes later, Human Resources tried a different approach. HR, there appears to have been a miscommunication regarding your termination. We would like to clarify a few points. I laughed. A short sound that surprised me. Miscommunication did not come with a termination notice, and a smiling emoji spelled out like a punchline. Martin called again. This time I answered. Sierra, he said quickly. Too quickly. Let's get on a call and clear this up. I don't do calls anymore, I replied. You're making a mistake, he said. This could get serious. It already did, I said. The moment you hit send, he exhaled hard. Look. HR acted without full context. They sent the email you approved, I said. With your name on it. That emoji was unprofessional, he said. I'll admit that. I closed my eyes for a moment. I could see it clearly. The way it had sat at the end of the sentence, smug and casual. You didn't fire me by accident, I said. And you didn't forget to call. You chose not to. Silence. I'm willing to fix this, he said finally. We can reinstate you. Same title, same pay? I'm not interested, I replied. What do you want then, he asked. Frustration bleeding through. Everything in writing, I said. No calls, no verbal promises, no threats. He scoffed. You're holding the company hostage. I'm holding my property, I said. You're reacting to the consequences. Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. "Please," he said. "Just restore access while we talk." That word again, please. It landed flat. I ended the call and forwarded the legal email to a folder I had labeled documentation. Then I opened a blank document and began outlining terms, calmly, line by line. They had stopped trying to intimidate me. Now they were trying to soften the edges, rewrite the story, pretend respect had always been there. It hadn't. And until they understood that, nothing was moving. The first confirmation came from Lena late that afternoon. "They lost Northline," she said without preamble. I held the phone tighter. Northline had been with the company longer than I had. A steady contract, predictable volume, the kind of client executives bragged about during quarterly calls. They pulled out completely. Lena continued. No pause, no extension. They cited operational instability. I closed my eyes. That was processing when access dropped. "Yes," she said. "Martin promised them it would be resolved within hours." It wasn't. There was shouting in the background on her end. Voices overlapping, sharp and panicked. Someone said Martin's name with open anger. "Are you safe?" I asked. "I'm fine," she replied. "But things are changing fast. The board is here." That got my attention. She lowered her voice. "They called an emergency session. Legal, compliance, external auditors. They're reviewing everything tied to the licensing framework." "And Martin," I said. "He's not in the room anymore," she said. "He was asked to step out." I didn't smile. I didn't feel relief either. Just a quiet confirmation settling into place. An hour later, an unfamiliar name appeared in my inbox. Board liaison. "We are conducting an internal review regarding recent executive decisions. Please preserve all communications related to your termination." That was it. No threats, no demands, just procedure. Another message followed. This one forwarded from an internal thread Lena had access to. "Interim operations, all decisions related to systems access will be handled externally until further notice." Martin's name was nowhere on the chain. The company hadn't collapsed. Not yet, but something essential had cracked. The illusion that everything was under control. The belief that removing one person wouldn't ripple outward. They hadn't planned for scrutiny. They hadn't planned for consequences that couldn't be undone with a quick call or a rewritten narrative. Later that evening, Martin tried once more. "Martin? This has gone too far." I stared at the message and felt nothing. It hadn't gone far at all. It had gone exactly where it was always headed. The moment they decided to turn a dismissal into a joke and assumed the foundation beneath them would hold. The damage was no longer theoretical. It was documented, observed, irreversible. And for the first time since the email, the silence that followed felt different. The email from the board arrived just before evening. It wasn't from Martin. It wasn't from Human Resources. It came from someone named Claire Whitman, Interim Counsel, introduced with a title that didn't invite argument. "Claire, we would like to resolve this matter promptly. Please outline your conditions." I read it twice, then opened the document I had been refining all day. I didn't write angrily. I didn't write defensively. I wrote precisely. I replied within 10 minutes. Me first. A written acknowledgement that my termination was wrongful and executed during approved leave. This acknowledgement must be signed by the company and placed in my personnel file. No hedging, no softened language. Me second, financial compensation for damages caused by the termination, including lost income, reputational harm, and disruption immediately preceding my wedding. I paused, then continued. Me third, an ongoing licensing agreement for the continued use of my proprietary systems. Terms will reflect market value and will be administered through counsel. I did not mention forgiveness. I did not mention reconciliation. My phone rang. I let it ring. A moment later, a message appeared from Martin, forwarded through Claire. "Martin, this is excessive." I replied only to her. "Me, these are the terms." Minutes passed. Then more. Another email arrived. "Claire, would you consider restoring partial access during negotiations?" I answered calmly. Me. "No. Access will be restored once terms are accepted in writing." The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. I imagined the room where they were reading my email, the way my words removed every option except agreement or loss. Lena texted me quietly. "Lena, they're arguing. Not about you. About who approved the firing. That told me everything. I received one last message from Claire near the end of the hour. Claire, the board is reviewing your proposal. I closed my laptop and set it aside. There was nothing more to add. No leverage left to reveal. I had not raised my voice once. I had not threatened. I had not begged. For the first time since this began, the outcome was no longer in my hands. It was in theirs, and the cost of refusing was finally clear. The agreement arrived just after dawn. It was concise, signed, final. Claire, the board accepts all stated terms. Please confirm restoration timeline. I read the attached documents slowly. The acknowledgement was there, plain and unambiguous. Wrongful termination during approved leave. The compensation terms were outlined in full, including coverage for the disruption caused in the days leading up to my wedding. The licensing agreement followed, structured, enforceable, and administered through counsel. No loopholes, no favors. Another email followed, this one marked internal but forwarded intentionally. Board liaison effective immediately. Martin Hale is terminated for executive misconduct. I sat with that for a moment. There was no satisfaction in it. Just wait. Consequence finally landing where it belonged. Lena called me a few minutes later. They announced it this morning, she said. Security walked him out. No speech, no goodbye email. And human resources? I asked. They're rewriting policies, she said. Termination approvals, leave protections, executive oversight. It's all being audited. I closed my eyes briefly, then opened the licensing console. I restored access exactly as outlined in the agreement. Step by step. Verification logs clean. Dependencies resolving one by one. Systems began responding again, cautiously at first, then fully. Orders resumed. Internal tools unlocked. The company started breathing on its own. Claire emailed once more. Claire access confirmed. Thank you for your cooperation. I logged out and removed my credentials permanently. An hour later, another message came in from the board. Board liaison. You are welcome to return under revised leadership if you choose. I did not reply. I forwarded everything to my attorney, closed the laptop, and stood up. The company would survive. It would continue, smaller and more careful, marked by what had happened. I would not be part of that story anymore. I packed away the last of the documents and turned my attention back to the life waiting for me. The one that had been interrupted but not taken. What remained was mine, and I was done explaining it. The morning of my wedding, my phone buzzed once. It was a calendar alert I had set months earlier, cake tasting. 2:00. I smiled and cleared it. Nothing else demanded my attention. No emergency calls, no crisis emails. The noise had finally stopped. Ready, my fiancé asked, adjusting his tie. His voice was steady. The way it had been through all of this. I said, and meant it. Later that week, after the last thank you notes were sealed, I took a call I had been waiting for. The woman on the line introduced herself as Mara Collins, head of platform strategy at a firm I had admired for years. We reviewed your work, she said, and the way you handled your exit. I didn't interrupt. We want you, she continued, but only if the terms are yours. They are, I said. I don't work without clear boundaries. Good, Mara replied. Neither do we. The offer arrived that afternoon. Senior role, written protections, clear ownership language, a schedule that respected life outside work. I signed without hesitation on the 1st of the next month. A transfer confirmation appeared in my inbox. The licensing fee from my former company, processed automatically, exactly as agreed. The amount was fair, the timing precise, no messages attached. Lena texted me later. They're careful now, she wrote. Everything goes through legal, no shortcuts. Good, I typed back. A week after I started my new role, a junior engineer hesitated before speaking up in a meeting. I waited. I think there's a risk here, she said quietly. Say it? I told her. We're listening. She did. And the room shifted in a way I recognized. Respect settling into place. I didn't destroy a company. I forced one to look at itself, then stepped aside. The life I built after that was quieter, sturdier, and entirely mine.